All right. Hello there, everybody. My name is Jonathan Mahan. This is the Courageous Conversations podcast. Today, I have Maya Sandstrom on with me. And we're going to be having a conversation about our privileges in different instances in our lives where we've seen our privileges help us. And before we get started with that, I do want to clarify, because there's a lot of people out there who don't know what privileges are. And truthfully, there's a lot of different definitions probably of privileges, right? It's possible the one we're rolling with might not be the only definition out there. So when we're talking about privileges here, we're talking about ways that your life is less challenging than other people's lives. And what's kind of implied here is that we're talking about unearned privileges in this conversation, right? Ways that our lives are less challenging than people's lives that don't come about as a result of some effort of our own, right? And that's all it is. So you got to recognize that everyone has privileges, right? A lot of our conversation will be focused on our privileges as white people, but it'll also go into other territories as well. And regardless of who you are, you have some privileges not shared by other people. And there is no harm and no shame and no guilt in recognizing that your life isn't as challenging as other people's are, and that the same amount of effort you put into your life might not have gotten you the same results if you were somebody else, right? And that's all it is. And once we recognize our privileges, we can start to work to undo the systems that created those unfair privileges. And also, once we recognize our privileges, we can start finding ways to use our privileges to help people. And until you recognize them, there's no way you can do that. So that's our conversation today. Maya, I'll let you kick off with any thoughts of your own, and then also, start sharing with us that story that you started to share on LinkedIn earlier this morning.
Sure.
Because I'd love to hear that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me today, Jonathan. It's great to be back with you. I think just to your point about recognizing privilege first is kind of the first step in undoing the kind of systemic privileges that especially white people have. So personally, taking that first step and just saying I do have privilege. I may not know all the privileges that I have, but I'm going to be mindful of it, and I'm going to work to undo the systemic privileges that are benefiting me as a person without having earned them, right? I think that's kind of my definition of privilege, is just unearned benefits that are gifted to you for your race, your gender, your ability level, right? So I'll jump in. After you shared your story, it kind of reminded me of the first time I was really kind of made aware of one of the privileges I didn't even know that I was kind of carrying around. When I was 16, I had a good friend in my algebra class. I was complaining about not having a lot of money and needing to get a job. And she said, well, I work at this theater downtown. It was like a block away from my house. I was like, that's perfect. I've been to the Delft many, many times. A very old theater, beautiful, beautiful theater in my hometown of Marquette, Michigan. And so after school, I just kind of walked in. I said, hi, I'm looking for Bill. I was sent by, my friend to talk to you about a position that was available. And he was a little terse. He was a little rude and said, well, that would have been nice if she would have told me you were coming. And so, the reception wasn't very warm, but he ended up interviewing me, and I, got the job, and I started the following week. And, within the next year, I was a staff manager. A couple years after that, I was assistant manager. So, I was able to work my way up, but 2 or 3 years into working at the Delft, I was at a Christmas party, I think, or some sort of holiday company party, and Bill and I were chatting, and he kind of basically told me straight out that had I not been an attractive young woman who walked in kind of out of the blue, I probably wouldn't have, gotten in to even get an interview at this place. So that was a little bit of a shock, right? I hadn't ever had anybody tell me that I was gaining a privilege simply because I was, I had a symmetrical face, right? And he found me attractive. So that was kind of a wake up call that I had at about 18 or 19, that I was being viewed by others in ways that I just wasn't even considering.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I know a lot of people who push back on the idea of white privilege, and when they're talking, it's obvious that their idea of white privilege is that, just because you were white, you got the job, got the promotion, got the other promotion. Where in reality, I'm sure you had white coworkers who didn't get the promotion, right? I'm sure there were white people interviewed who didn't get the job. So it's not this idea that everything's just laid out for you to banquet and you take what you want because you're white. Of course not. There's still other factors at play. But yeah, the reality is, had you not had a body that adhered to conventional standards of beauty, you wouldn't have gotten it. Had you been a Black girl, more than likely, you wouldn't have even gotten the interview, right? Had you been disabled, like there's a million different ways we could look at
Exactly.
this. If you
Exactly.
weren't you, and again, you didn't earn, right, the body you were born in, you wouldn't have even gotten a chance. And that's kind of where the recognition privilege comes in. So I like that example. And that one's also kind of concrete, right? You got to hear on the back end the real reason
Right.
it happened.
I mean, that was a privilege too, that like a lot of people, because we were, we had gained a friendship and had a, close relationship, he felt comfortable enough to
Mhm.
tell me that truth, that I don't think a lot of people oftentimes get to hear.
Well, and that's the thing. That's what makes it so hard to pin this down, is that there's rarely any one instance that you can say absolutely the reason this happens because of X privilege, right? Because these things are so vague and nebulous, you can never really know what went into someone's gut feeling and decision, right? They often don't know what went into their gut feeling and decision. So it's rare that you get, as clear a picture as what you got. My story, and it's actually kind of I've had this happen a lot in professional circumstances, but I was living in Colorado at the time. I was 21 years old, and I wanted to move to West Virginia so my wife could go to school there. So I, applied online for a job at a local Verizon store for representative. Got on the phone, talked about my experience, and the guy right away said, we actually are going to need a manager in the store real soon. I'd like to interview you for that. Okay. And again, right there, you got to ask, had I been a Black woman, would he have thought to
Right.
himself, you know
Right.
what? This person doesn't fit the mold of representative. This person fits the mold of manager, right? Whatever led him, because, it was a brief conversation. I'm sure I did well on the call, but he didn't really know me that well. But something about the conversation with me rung that manager bell in his mind to say, he's management potential. I'm going to change the direction of this conversation. So I
Right.
got the interview, right? I interviewed with him over the phone. He liked me. I interviewed with the regional manager briefly over the phone. And then they offered me the job. Never having seen these people in person, 2 interviews, like total of 3 phone conversations, 1 short and 2 formal interviews, and they gave me the job. I'm 21 years old. Like, I did manage a Verizon store, but it was just me and another guy, and we were the smallest store around. And now I was moving up to like the biggest store in the district, right? And they already had 8 people on staff, a great assistant manager who could have been a good pick for the management position. And they gave it to this 21-year-old kid they had never met from across the country off of 2 phone calls. Now, again, I had an impressive resume because I'd worked hard at the last store. I did prepare for those interviews, so I did well. Like, wasn't a buffet that got handed to me. But the question is, would they have had that rock solid confidence that they were making the right choice had I been a Latina woman or a transgender man or anything like that, right? Would they have had that rock solid confidence? Let's even go smaller, right? Let's say I was just born with a speech impediment. Would you give 2 phone interviews? Would you give someone with a speech impediment the job? Probably no, right? Not that I've studied this area, but it's my understanding that people with speech impediments are generally assumed to be less competent, less intelligent, right? Just on that unconscious bias side of things. So I don't think they would have had that gut feeling of like, yeah, he's the guy. Let's do it, right? And
Yeah.
again, I
I
didn't
think
earn
to
any of
your
those privileges that I
and to
had.
your name point, right? That you had
Yeah.
listed in your LinkedIn post, like, would you have even gotten the call if your name was Letitia?
Yeah.
I personally, when I first moved to Chicago, was kind of I was participating in a little bit of I guess like racist behavior, because I assumed, because my name was Maya and people probably weren't, looking at my LinkedIn profile up front, that I was, I knew even before I moved down here, before I started working in HR, that people with Black sounding names were less likely, 50% less likely to get a call when they were applying for jobs. So I ended up putting M Sandstrom on a lot of my resumes, because I was thinking, well, this is going to eliminate the anti-Black and the anti-women bigotry that I
Yeah.
might experience in resume reviews. And thinking back on this now, like, why would I want to work for a company who is going to discriminate against someone because of their perceived background or sex from their name? But I think about the kind of racism that I was participating in as I was looking for a job, and trying to hide my potential, ethnicity or
Yeah,
gender by doing that. So I think that there's a lot in a name, right? And there's just this perceived perception of competency that has nothing to do with the person, but there's that just inherent thing that we do when we're scanning resumes like that. So I think naming
absolutely.
is difficult. Yeah.
Well, and this has been a trend across my career, right? Of people giving me opportunities that I wasn't quite ready for, people taking a chance on me and saying, you know
Right.
what? You don't have the qualifications, the experience, the skill set, but there's just something about you I like. I think I can trust you. And again, some of that comes from things that I've earned, maybe how educated I am, maybe, a
Sure.
lot of things. But a lot of that comes down to the fact that I'm a cisgender, straight, white male, reasonably attractive, able-bodied, like every
Right.
privilege in the book I have. And that leads to that gut feeling of we can trust this guy. We're willing to take a leap of faith on him, right? And again, I didn't earn those things, and those things aren't shared equally. Another good example of this, the first time when I first moved to Colorado, right? I moved into, I got a job remotely. This was just a sales rep job, so a little less crazy, but it was another example of getting a job with never meeting me. Just one phone interview, and they offered me the job.
Right.
Again, I don't know if people of color share that experience of one phone interview from 8 states away being good enough, but they offered me
Not
the job
likely.
without ever having
Right.
met me. And I get there and I find out like the week before I got there, the two people who were in the store had just quit, up and left.
Hmm.
So they had hired another guy and me, and we both started like the same day. And over the course of the first month or so of training us, I made a great first impression, and they hired me for the manager position, even though I was 20 at that time. Actually, I was only 20 at that time. And the guy I was working with was like 27 or something. Now we're both
Sure.
cisgender, straight white males, so we were pretty evenly ranked as far as privileges went. So it really just came down to a matter of who gave them a better sense of competency. I had worked at a Verizon store in the past, so I kind of learned the ropes quicker. So they got
Sure.
the good feeling about me and they gave it to me, right? That necessarily isn't a matter of privilege because, again, we're both cisgender straight white men. But imagine had I been a transgender man. Imagine had I been a black woman, had a Latina woman, a black man, for God's sake. Had I been anything else, I wonder if they would have given the role to the 20-year-old kid who joined instead of the 27-year-old, right? We'll never know, but it just seems interesting that I keep having these occurrences of these people taking a risk on me and giving me the benefit of the doubt, right? I had never been a manager at that point in my life. I had only worked at the previous Verizon store for like 3 months, so my extra experience was not very significant, right?
Right.
And I got the position. And again, I don't think if I'd been a Latina woman, I would have gotten the position. So it's just this constant theme for me, of getting these opportunities over
I
and over.
agree. I agree. And there's something to be said about that, right? Because like I think white people specifically don't understand that there is probably a lot of that. I'm just going to go ahead and take a chance on you. Maybe you don't have all the skills, but I'm going to go ahead and take a chance on you. And a lot of it has to do with you look like me, and I think that we have a similar experience.
I would love to ask this to people of different marginalized groups, but I cannot tell you how many times men in power in my life have said, "You remind me of myself at a younger age." All the effing time. And I wonder if they say that to young Latina women, right?
They,
Some
I,
people probably
how
not, but I'm not sure.
Right.
I
How
hear it all
could
the
they? Right. I mean, like, we don't, I think, especially when you're crossing both like race and gender lines, right? Like,
time. Mhm.
that's a scary prospect to like, to put someone in a position where like you have to learn, um, especially when you're a cisgendered white male, right? Like you're not really required to learn a whole lot about the female experience or the black experience or the Latinx experience.
Yeah.
So like taking a chance on someone who doesn't look like you, who comes from a different background, who comes from, a different like gender experience or ability experience,
Yeah.
I think is very scary, especially for a lot of, white male leaders right now, because it's like it's requiring a lot of work. And unfortunately, this equity and understanding privilege does come with it comes with a lot of additional work, because every time you step into these spaces and think about these things, um, you have to contextualize, right? You have to open yourself up and like think about what it's like to be in another person's shoes. That takes a lot of mental effort. And I appreciate the leaders who are out there doing that and mentoring folks who don't look like them, who are not the same gender, because it does take a lot of additional effort. But I think not many people are willing to put forth.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I've never had a hard time in my career, right, finding people who are willing to mentor me, even if not an exhaustive standpoint, even just, for short stints, right? It's always been easy to find mentors, and more often than not, they've been cisgender straight white men like me, you
Right.
know, that
Right.
we connect with. And again, they see a lot of potential in me. It's easy for them to see my potential, right? There's less barriers to them seeing my potential than there would
Yes.
be for someone else. So I even thinking about it too. There's another example that, is probably less race and gender, more economic privilege. So when I moved away from the West Virginia store to come back to Colorado second time, I started working at a software company called BombBomb. And again, not qualified for this job. The only thing I'd ever done in my sales career was sell cell phones to old ladies. And here I'm selling software packages to businesses, right?
Yeah.
Like no experience. Yes, I did sales, but my God, there were different types of sales.
Yeah.
Um, and they hired me. Now, this company did want me to come do an in-person interview. They weren't quite willing to do it, sight unseen.
Yeah.
Um, and I lived in West Virginia at the time and couldn't afford a plane ticket. But my wife's dad has a job where he travels a ton for work, and he
Mm.
had tons of airline points and tons of hotel points. And when he heard that I couldn't afford to fly out there, he's like, "Oh, dude, I got the points." He covered the airline flight and the hotels. I think all I paid for was food and a rental car, right? So I was able to go do the interview. I was able to get the job. I was able to move to Colorado. That job, among many things, has been a turning point for my life to get out of just low-end retail sales and into real business-to-business account executive stuff where you can make a real career and a lot of money. And that was
Right.
my key in. And I probably would have had to turn down the interview because I could not afford a plane ticket. I could not afford a hotel. And again, we just happened to come from a family where, there was an upper middle class setting, and, he happened to have a job with airline points. So I was able to get out there. But there's lots and lots of people in the country of all races and genders who do not come from families who had airline points or even the means or money to send them places, right? And those people
Absolutely.
would have had to turn down that job. So there's just another instance of privilege, right?
Absolutely. I'm happy that you brought that example up because I kind of I didn't really think about that in the context of me being able to move down here. So I was raised in a, we weren't a poor family, but we certainly, we didn't take vacations as children. I didn't really travel too much. I think we went to visit my grandparents kind of frequented Alabama. My grandfather had lost a lung to TB in his, I think, 30s, and so they were snowbirds. They spent most of their winters down in Alabama, and that was like one of the only trips I remember taking as a child. So like thinking about privilege and like experiencing other things and other cultures, other people, and like the lack of availability to travel that a lot of people have because a lot of folks are economically downtrodden in the Americas, and they don't travel, anywhere outside of the 50-mile radius of the place that they grew up. So like thinking about the fact that I was able to, like, I had a friend who kind of bankrolled moving down here. He took care of the first few months of our rent and, allowed me to kind of find my feet and gave me time to find a job and all of these levels of privilege that we don't really think about because, he and I lived in kind of, we were teetering on not poverty, but, always paycheck to paycheck. And that's kind of how my parents, worked and lived too. So, to think like, I think a lot of the resistance that white people have to like accepting that they have privilege is economically based. Because they say, well, I don't have white privilege because I've had to work so very hard for everything that I've had in my life. And we can all say that, we can all, well, not all of us actually, no. There are few people who don't have to work for anything in life, but um, there are a lot of white people who have been forever, generationally, they feel like they have never been able to kind of reach that American dream. They've never been able to get economically stable, and I think that's a lot of the resistance that white people have in saying like, okay, well, I do have certain levels of privilege. Maybe it's not economically based, but I think that's where they get halted, right? Because they
Oh,
feel
yeah.
like they've been held back. And so if I don't have this privilege, then it doesn't matter what other privileges other people have. I don't have that kind of privilege. But I think like if we can remove the economic or the like the social mobility privilege that we kind of all fall back on when we're talking about accepting our own level of privilege. That would, I think, open up a lot of space. But yeah, I'm glad you brought up that example. It's something I didn't even think about, right? I was like, I'm just lucky. I'm just lucky I have a friend who, had enough in savings, and I'm lucky that I had a family who was able to kind of, help me pay my bills and bridge the gap for those first few months. But that is a level of privilege that not everyone has. Absolutely.
Jenny here asked, a lot of non-believers can't recognize this because they feel like when you say you have privilege, you're saying you didn't work hard to get where you are, right? And I don't know if I have the full answer for this, but I think part of the answer is just recognizing and kind of explaining to them that privilege is not a single item. You either have it or don't have it, yes or no. It's not a magic spell, right? Just understand that everyone has various forms of privilege. Some people have lots of privileges. Some people have few privileges. It is just a fact of life that we all have. It's not like do's and don'ts, right? It's a matter of how much and how little, right? I don't know of anyone who doesn't have any sort of privileges. Exactly. But do you have any other answer to that question, Maya, of how to get people to realize it's okay to admit you have privilege? It doesn't mean you didn't work hard.
I think, unfortunately, and especially with a lot of these conversations, it is going to have to be nuanced with the individual person, right? So I think just simply having a conversation about privilege with someone who is, kind of militantly, I don't have privilege and I will not accept that. I think that's the first step is just being open and kind of willing to maybe rebroach that subject every now and again, because there's going to be a spot where you can say, okay, you have this example of where you don't have privilege, but I've seen XYZ in your life where, I think oftentimes, if we can bring up this idea of, especially when we're talking about race and privilege, if white people can kind of be made aware of the fact that most of the spaces, especially in America, they're created for us. The advertisements on the billboards in large cities, I mean, they're becoming more diverse, but most of the advertisements you're going to see in New York and Chicago and LA, they're going to be white people, or, white identifying people. So I think that is maybe kind of a general example that someone could use when they're talking to someone who's just like militantly saying, I don't have any privilege. Absolutely not. Is like just saying that, well, think about, there's like 13% Black people in the United States, right? Compared to all other races. But like, how often do you see them represented in the marketing materials that you see? Or how often do you see them represented in advertisements or just in the spaces that you frequent? When you go to the grocery store, how many, is it mostly white people? And when you walk into, say, a grocery, like if I'm on the grocery store in the South Side, I'm going to feel like I'm the one out of place because it's mostly Black people who are there. But like, that's something that I think we could use as a general example, but maybe like specifically in a conversation with a person as we're out talking with them or on a walk, or, just like maybe asking them to think about that the next time they're in a specific place, or, perusing social media and coming across the advertisements and the pop-ups that are inevitably going to come across your feed. I think that's maybe kind of a generalized way that we could maybe broach the subject of privilege. And that also gets into representation and things like that. But just saying, like, every space that you walk into as a white person in America, 99% of the time, it was created to make you as a white person feel comfortable and welcome.
Yeah. Well, this brings up something that I have become aware of because of my sister who's trans, but certainly applies to people in any marginalized group. So in my career, as you can tell from my stories, I have location hopped quite a bit, and I have company hopped quite a bit in pursuit of that perfect lifestyle, that perfect location, that perfect company, that perfect role. And I've hopped around quite a bit. And I've never had to worry about it because every town I want to live in is safe for me and my family to live in. And every company I want to work at is going to be welcoming and accepting of me. And I can literally go anywhere. My sister's trans and has stayed in Buffalo, New York at the company she works at for a long, long time. I don't really know, 10, 12 years, whatever it's been at this point. And, there could be many reasons for that, right? Maybe she just likes the company, but actually, I don't think she likes the company all that much. So, a big part of that is that at her company, I don't know if it's the owner or one of the top board members, top dogs. They have a trans son or daughter, I can't remember, but they have a child who's trans and is very open and accommodating. And the place she's at now, anyone who was going to give her grief stopped doing so long ago. She knows that upper management, more or less has her back.
Right.
I don't think she's happy there, and I think there's a lot of complaints she could lodge against them, but she knows she's safe there.
Right.
And the chance of going to another company and not being sure who you're going to be working with and what it's going to be like and will it be safe, the chance of moving to another town and not being sure who your neighbors are going to be and what the police force is going to be like
right.
Those are things I never have to think about. Literally, I can location hop and company hop anytime I want because it's safe for me and, like to your point, designed to be comfortable for me everywhere I go. Where I think for people in marginalized groups, once they find something that's okay, there's definitely this fear of like, the devil over the devil you don't, right? Is it going to be worse? Maybe I should just stay here. And that definitely limits career growth and mobility. That even limits life satisfaction to some extent because you don't get to, live the places you want to live. Like, again, just a privilege I didn't earn that I've had my whole life and never even thought about until recently.
Right. I there's a lot to say about being an ally. I think a lot of being an ally too, if you want to use your power in the space that you have it, right, is trying to make spaces where you have some influence and power better for people who are not like you. So trans people, people of color, if you're a white person, I think oftentimes what holds us back as white people in kind of utilizing that privilege that we have, A, we have to recognize that we have it, but B is recognizing the power that we have within the spaces that we frequent. So, if we are seeing someone in the grocery store, so I'll bring up maybe one of the examples that we kind of chatted about the last time we talked, and that like my aunt was telling me a story about her son-in-law who's Black. They live in South Carolina. He and my cousin have been married for, gosh, I think about 4 years now. They've been dating for 3 or 4 before that. So she's known this man for like 8 years of her life. And he has said, he's over and over again, he's just like, sometimes he'll come home from the store and just be like so frustrated and angry because he's, been profiled and the security guards have been following him and he can't even go to Walmart and just pick up a couple of things without, having to steel himself before he goes into this space. And it took my aunt, getting a firsthand story from her white son-in-law who was visiting and had gone to the store with Ryan, and it took him saying like, I can't believe what happened when we got into the store, and like I could see the security guards eyeing Ryan up right away, and it took me kind of going by him and showing them that I am with him before they kind of left him alone or left his purview. So I think beyond recognizing it, it's like Matt, my other I guess cousin-in-law, he was able to kind of just didn't have to say anything, didn't really have to do anything, literally just stepped as a white person into the space where the Black person was being marginalized and profiled, and made that space a little bit safer for him at that time. So I think that's just kind of something that we can think about as white people. What kind of power do I have at work? Like what can I say to my HR manager? What can I say to the person of color whom I work with to make sure that they know that like I am a safe person. They can come to me if something's happening, or I will be there as a support.
Yeah.
That is something that we can definitely think about more, especially as we're kind of taking on this work.
Yeah. And maybe we'll have time to get into this today, maybe we won't, but that also brings up the important, issue of, what you do with your privilege, right? First step is recognizing you have privilege, but the second step is recognizing what to do with it. I
Right.
remember you shared that story in the past, right? The takeaway lesson that first time you shared it was that, your aunt didn't believe Ryan, the black man, for 8 years about what he was experiencing. One time, a white man
Right.
tells her this is happening, and she suddenly believes it now. And that's unfortunate, but that's reality. So
Yeah.
knowing you have that privilege, you better effing use it. It's why we're doing this today, Maya, right? It's literally why
Yeah.
we're having this conversation, because I don't believe it should be only people in marginalized communities talking about privilege, right? It should be the people like us who have lots of privileges talking about it as well, because unfortunately, the world is conditioned to take my words a little bit more seriously than all the other people's words. So
Right.
it's all about doing it. What you mentioned about the profiling, I think brings up a nice transition here. Have you had any experiences with the police that have led you to feel that your privilege assisted you in those scenarios?
Absolutely. I I'm forgetting how long ago this was, but I was still living in Marquette at the time, and I had gone to dinner with a friend, and we had I think it was like 2 beers over the course of an hour and a half. And I got in my car and I was driving home. It was probably like 5 blocks. Marquette's very small. Everything's within like 10 or 15 minutes of one another. Um, and so I probably wasn't, under the, I shouldn't say drunk, but I was, under the influence. And I ended up I saw a cop behind me, and I ended up kind of freaking out a little bit, and I blew a red light. And like, of course, he pulled me over because it's 9 o'clock at night on a Sunday, and like, she had enough time. She definitely had enough time to stop. But I got nervous, so I
Mhm.
I I did the wrong thing and I blew the red light, and he ended up pulling me over, and I wasn't drunk. I was able to speak clearly, and he did no field sobriety tests. Which, hey, if I was a black person or a brown person, I can't say
Maybe.
that they wouldn't have done that straight away, because he had probable cause for sure.
Yeah.
And again, like I have a feeling that my my face and me being able to kind of speak clearly and succinctly got me out of a ticket and got me out of some trouble there. Absolutely, absolutely. As a it's all privilege. Looking back on it, it's like, oh, I'm super lucky. Like, whoa.
Yeah.
No, it was all privilege in many, many forms. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I know. I've been pulled over, I don't know, at least half a dozen times. And never once have I ever been scared. It was always just like, God damn it, am I going to have to pay money? Ugh, or, oh, I'm going to be late.
Right,
And that was it.
right,
Right? That in itself is a privilege to not have that fear. But in all the times I've been pulled over, I've never once been asked to step out of the vehicle or had my vehicle searched or anything of that nature. I've never once had a police officer be rude or irate with me. Um, I would
hi
say
sir,
in theory,
hello
I
ma'am.
get let off. I've certainly gotten a few tickets, but I usually get like minimum tickets, like, hey, you did this, but I'm gonna give you a ticket for this instead. Or in some
Right,
cases,
right,
slow down, kid, and do better next time. Like I
right,
think I've probably gotten 2 tickets out of the, at least half dozen times I've been pulled over. And again, both those times they gave me a lower ticket than what they could have given me.
right.
Where, you hear plenty of stories of the opposite happening with people of color, where they hit you with 6 tickets for the most ridiculous, inane things over a small offense. So there's that.
Absolutely.
I also was thinking the other day, me and my younger brother had tons of run-ins with the police when we were teenagers. We weren't really doing anything wrong, but we always looked like we were, right?
Sure.
We were always bored and just wandering around in the middle of the night in strange places where people don't normally go, and behind buildings and back alleys and parcels of private property out in the woods. And we were constantly getting the police called on us, or the police would just see us, right? Grocery store manager would see us wandering around in the woods behind the grocery store that they technically owned. Police would show up. We one time, because we were bored, myself, my brother, and a friend of ours, in the middle of winter. So we live, upper New York State, same kind of climate, you grew up in. Middle of winter, we go down to the very edge of the lake shore where all like the ice dams and stuff are, and we like create a wooden shelter and then drag a bunch of sleeping bags out there in the middle of the night using a tarp, dragging these sleeping bags out to the edge of the lake shore so that we can sleep. And the cops get called on us by people who think we're dragging a dead body down to the lake. And they show up and they very calmly ask us what we're doing, and we explain what
Yeah.
we're doing, and they call our mom to make sure that, yeah, it's okay for us to be here. And then they let us go and we go sleep our night in the shelter. And like, again, never raised their voices, never touched us, never pulled a gun on us, didn't didn't call 8 police cars, right? It was 1 police car with 2 people that showed up. We have been, trespassing on city property at night because we're just taking walks and wandering. Police show up, shine their flashlight. What you guys doing? We're just bored wandering around. Well, you guys got to get out of here. Okay, we're gone. And that's it. And like every summer, there was 2 or 3 instances where we'd have run-ins with police, and they were always polite. They were cordial.
Right.
They like, again, nothing ever happened. Nothing ever came of it. We got to the point where we weren't even nervous to see police coming. We were like, hey, how's it going?
Yeah, we gotta deal with them. Yeah, yeah.
And it's just crazy. Like my mom never had to worry about us. We never had to worry about us. And I thought that was the way the police treated everybody, right? I had no idea until later in life, and really not fully until this summer, that, oh,
Right.
that's not how the police treat everybody. The police are, show up to an incident with 2 Black teenagers wandering around on city property, and immediately their gun's out, right? Or at the very least, they're suspicious and their guard is up. Where with us, the moment they saw us, they relaxed and were like, oh, okay, it's just 2 little kids. I'll just tell them to leave, right? And Black teenagers don't get that privilege, right? Black teenagers are held suspect to begin with, and they have to find a way to work the police officer down to calm them down, which is really hard to do when you know your life is in danger, right?
Exactly.
Where again, it was easy for us to be relaxed and casual because we knew we were safe, right? And it's just, that's the way it should be, right? Like that's the way the police should treat everybody. Those police did great police work with us. And I
Right.
just wish that wasn't a privilege. I wish that was the way it was across the board.
Me too, Jonathan. And I mean, living in both a very small town and dealing with the police. I mean, even there, for some reason, we were just kind of afraid of the police officers, and I think it was this idea that like maybe it was a class thing or something. I don't know, but there was still an idea that like you needed to maybe be afraid of the police, but maybe it was just the culture. Maybe it was the entertainment I was consuming or something. I'm not sure. I've always just kind of been slightly afraid of the police. But anytime I've ever had an interaction with them, it's never actually been scary. It's that heart racing as they're coming up to your window to tell you that you've been speeding, or but I've never had the type of fear that I know Black people, every single time a police officer pulls them over, there is a real chance that they very well might lose their life. I've been afraid, but I've never been fearful for my life from the police. That is definitely a privilege that, I'm sorry, every single white person has. Every single white person has.
Oh my
in
God.
America.
You know what else we did? Again, when we were teenagers, my brother and the same friend, we lived on a port city, right? So there was a port, a harbor, and there was break walls and stuff, and there was a channel where the break walls weren't, where boats could come in. And we were out there. We had like swam from the shore to the beginning of a break wall and walked along it and gotten kind of out to that main point of exit and entry into the harbor. And we looked across at the break wall on the other side, and we're like, "That's not that far, dog. We can swim that. I don't see any boats. Do you? Let's swim that, right?" So we swam that. A boat came, called the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard came, very politely and kindly picked us up and brought us back to the station, called our parents, who came and got us and brought us home, and everything was smooth and cordial. Our parents gave us a tongue lashing. But like the Coast Guard was just there to help us and protect us and keep us safe and be kind and be cordial and be friendly and give us the benefit of the doubt and, tell us what we did was wrong and just kind of leave it at that. Now, I don't know if I've heard a lot of stories of Black people swimming across harbor channels and being, picked up by the Coast Guard. But in general, again, I got the sense very much that these people were here to help me and protect me and take care of me and, do what they had to keep me safe. And I was not a threat to them, and they were there to protect and serve me, right? And again, I just went home that incident.
Talk about freedom of being able to utilize space too, right?
Mm-hmm.
There was never any thought about, at 2 a.m. just like going down to the beach. And I mean, in the summertime, obviously, I wasn't going to the beach in the winter, but just being able to, just being able to walk the streets at 2 a.m. and not really have to think about, well, how are the cops going to perceive me? They're going to perceive me as a white person walking around at 2 a.m. Like, they're not, unless I'm stumbling on the street and I'm like maybe putting myself in danger, no one's going to do anything. No
Yeah.
one's going to stop and think twice about what I'm doing. Even if I were probably milling in someone's backyard, they probably wouldn't think twice. She's just a crazy lady, right? She's just a crazy white lady.
Yeah. And again, if the cops got called on you, they'd show up and be calm, peaceful, cordial, and not escalate things if you didn't. And, give you
Exactly.
the benefit of the doubt when they could, and you'd be safe, right? Maybe
Yep.
they take you to jail for a night,
Agency with
or
faith.
maybe they let you go, but you would be safe. And again, I just wish that was a way for everyone, right? Because again, that's what those people are trained to do and try to do. But for some reason, those unconscious biases and fears and gut judgments and like snap-second
Straight up
decisions,
racism.
all
Mm-hmm.
these things work against people of color.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um, if you don't have anything else on the law enforcement side of things, we can kind of close out talking about some privileges that we often don't think about because they aren't in the news as much. And that's like privileges of health and ability, both physical and mental. One for me, may not seem all that huge, but it really is important. I've had a number of setbacks in my life here in Colorado, whether it's a big setback, like when I got fired over the summer, or even just a small setback, like not being able to pay the bills one month, or missing a sales target, or having a rough conversation with a manager, and or heck, even just the kids driving me crazy. And for me, when world is getting to be too much, and I find that I'm not able to be my best self, I disappear in the mountains for a day. I go hike in the mountains. My soul is healed. My mind is healed. I come back ready to tackle challenges and do great things, and I come back on top. And the only reason I can do that is because I have a body that can take me from the bottom to the top of a mountain and in safety, right? And there are lots of people who don't have bodies that can take them up to the top of mountains, right? And you don't think
A
of that.
mountain nearby to
Those
climb.
small things, right, have helped me keep my mental health where it needs to be and keep my head above water during some of the most turbulent times of my life. Not everyone has that privilege.
Absolutely. I mean, just basically having a physically able body is a privilege that, I mean, honestly, until our conversation today, it just doesn't cross my mind. It doesn't cross my mind at this point as being something that, like, not everybody has, you know? Um, I deal with my own mental health stuff. I think everyone right now is dealing with some sort of level of anxiety or depression or, whatever it might be, because of COVID. And if you're doing things right, you're isolating and you're keeping other people safe. But, just having a good baseline mental health has helped see me through COVID. I don't think about that as being a privilege, but now that we're talking about it, like, just having a baseline understanding of my own mental health, having a baseline coping mechanism that is semi healthy, right? I don't drink a whole lot. I don't, escape that way.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of folks that, maybe won't see being physically healthy, being mentally healthy as a privilege. Um, yeah, I think that's definitely something that, and I think to do this work as well, like, you have to be prepared to test your mental health. But knowing that you have a kind of baseline where you can start, that is definitely a privilege that not all of us have. And I didn't even think about it until our conversation today. Absolutely.
Well, it hit me real clearly a week or two ago. I was listening to a talk by a transgender woman, um, and she was talking about how in the stage of her life, I don't know if it was right before she transitioned or right after, friends of hers were becoming pilots, were getting promoted at work, were launching their own businesses, were starting a family, were getting involved in the military and getting decorations in the military, and she was just trying to survive one more day. Like, and for her, that was caused by being transgender in a world that did not at all support transgender people. But that's the same experience, or that's a similar outcome, rather, to people who have really terrible mental health, right? And I have known for a long part of my life that through some combination of my neurobiology and my upbringing, I have rock solid mental health. Any dips I have, I'm able to recover from fairly quickly. And I tend to go longer and longer between dips as I age, right? Like, and again, I certainly work on my mental health, but I'm starting way, way ahead of where most people ever get to, right?
Right.
And it's such an advantage because when you have strong mental health, you can do things other than just focus on surviving, right?
Right.
This podcast that I'm doing, there's no way in hell I would be doing this podcast right now, talking to you today, if I had crummy mental health, right? This takes, a certain amount of vulnerability and boldness and like a sense of confidence and self-worth. This takes time and energy and effort and passion and, belief in myself when I start doubting myself, and like mental energy to push through when I want to give up. Like, this podcast takes a lot. And I would not be doing this if I didn't have great mental health, right? And I would be stuck living a life where I'm not able to really hit my potential and do all the things that I want to do. I would probably still be thinking thoughts like, gee, I would love to do a podcast called Courageous Conversations, but I'd
Mhm.
pull it off without great mental health. I'm doing this. I'm also involved in coordinating the anti-racism group we're a part of, right?
Right.
I'm doing things at work. Like, I'm doing tons of things every day from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to bed. It's just packed full of things and life and living and experiencing and doing. And I'm becoming so much better, happier, and full of a person from doing that. But the truth is that wouldn't be an option on the table. I was really struggling with mental health. It would just be a matter of, how do I survive today into tomorrow? And, we can, I think this is mentality of like, well, just push through it and toughen up, bucko, right? But the truth is that's not a long-term strategy. It's probably not even a short-term strategy. And I'm able to do that, and it works for me because I have great mental health, right? When I do get in a low spot, I can kind of pull myself out. But for so many people who have chronic mental health issues, and I'm not even just talking about intense things like, schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, or
Right.
things that are like, recognized in the DSM or whatever,
Yeah.
like just being someone who's prone to anxiety, depression, mood fluctuations, even if it isn't diagnosable, that still pulls you down, and that still limits your potential, and that still makes surviving one day to the next difficult. And
Yeah.
folks like me who have pretty good mental health, we just don't have to deal with that crap. We're able to do so much more, accomplish so much more in our lives, and have so many more adventures and experiences because our mental health isn't weighing us down constantly. And I've certainly worked on my mental health, but I didn't earn the
Right.
fact that I'm starting out 10 pegs ahead of everyone, right?
Yeah.
Just some combination of my upbringing, biology put me here. And it's not fair.
No, no, it's not. And you have to think about like the trauma, and just to bring it back to the responsibility of white people and taking on this work, is that like we don't have the generational trauma that Black people do.
Yeah.
That definitely increases their chances of depression, anxiety, and mental health issues, right? So beyond that, then think about healthcare access and the fact that white people have more access to healthcare, and when they do get the healthcare, it's actually being delivered in a more equitable manner.
Yeah.
So I, I think like mental health as a privilege, right? Even if you're struggling with your mental health, if you're able to keep it under check, that's a privilege, right? There's so many of us who are out there just like self-medicating, or not able to see a therapist, not able to get any sort of not able to, we don't have mountains nearby to go and like help us experience nature. So again, that comes in that space privilege too, right? So um I'm gonna mull on this a lot more, because I've been thinking a lot about like having stable mental health and being able to do this work, and all of the Black professionals that we interact with every single day who have to take that extra step, and then they're taking that and educating us, right? So we can take a little bit of privilege that we have and find a little bit of power in the spaces that we frequent and have influence over, and we can use that power for good, and we can take some of that burden off of Black and brown people who are having to always take 2, 3, 5 extra steps just to be recognized like white people.
Yeah. And right, to think of the breadth of this conversation, right, and all the privileges from employment to mental health to, resources and all this stuff. And then just imagine having the audacity to say, okay, well, you people who lack a lot of these privileges, It's on you to find the extra bandwidth to also fix the societal issues of undoing racism, right? In addition to all these extra steps you have to take just to get by, you also have to go above and beyond to undo this centuries old system of oppression. While me, who does not have to jump nearly that number of hurdles, I'm not expected to do
And
anything.
benefiting from that system of that generation.
Yeah, that system,
oppression.
that gave me these privileges. For me to sit back and be like, it's not really my fight, not really my thing. You know, I won't get in your way, but it's your work to do, people of color. I'm going to sit back here and use my weekends to go voting, right? Like the audacity to make suffering most from the system, in addition to finding a way to succeed despite the system, also having to have the bandwidth to then, on top of that, undo the system. Are you kidding me? which is why I'm no longer sitting on the sidelines and cheering people of color on in their fight against oppression.
Right.
I am finding ways to get involved. You know, I can't be a leader in this space because I spent most of my life blind to racism, and I would probably lead people in the wrong direction. But just because you can't be a leader because you don't understand racism or you don't want to do the wrong thing, just because you can't be a leader doesn't mean you can't be, a foot soldier. You can't be in the trenches. Right. You can't be a follower. You can't be a participant, Those of us with privileges, again, whether it's race or gender or whatever issue, those of us with privileges have got to take the lead on undoing the systems that gave them to us.
Totally agree. We're benefiting the most from them, so it's time to share the wealth and take on a lot of the work. Absolutely.
Cool.
Crash and burn in the afternoon here at my house. It's cool. No one died.
Yes, that's a sign that it's time to end, right? That's the sign of the curtain coming down.
Yes.
Right. Well, thanks so much for talking with me today, Maja.
Thank you for having me.
It was a good conversation for me to have, and I'm sure for you to have, and hopefully a lot of people listening to this have gotten a new perspective and a new way of thinking about things as well.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure to talk with you, Jon.
Always.